early gangster films, and this is important to note, most of these films are produced by the Warner Brothers. We are discussing classic Hollywood, remember? Associated with low budget films, made very popular, populistic kind of cinema, lapped up by the working class Americans. Some of the earlier films were The Lights of New York, Little Caesar, Public Enemy, Angels with Dirty Faces, The Roaring Twenties, White Heat, and the most popular actors were Edward G. Robinson, James Cagney, and Humphrey Bogart. And then later on we had Al Pacino. Al Pacino, there was a period when he made a career out of playing the essential gangster hero. De Niro, always a gangster. I mean, Al Pacino till, what was that movie with Johnny Depp? Donnie Brasco? Yes, he played a gangster till then, which was late 90s or so. So, what is an iconography? When we were doing semiotics, and we discussed 7 semiotics, particularly in relation to 7. So, the idea is that the filmmakers employ certain tropes, certain signs, certain symbols to create an iconography. When we are talking about iconography of a star, we talked about James Dean, how his entire persona conveyed that kind of a youthful energy. That was his iconography. And his films consolidated the kinds of roles he played, they consolidated that persona. So, an icon is created. Yeah. So, gangster hero, iconography of a gangster movie, the charismatic hero who embodies good as well as bad. Remember, an anti-hero has to be an embodiment of both these elements, good as well as bad. He cannot be an out and out negative hero, negative person, not a dark hearted villain who kills for no reason. Generally it has the dangerous woman, okay. There is a good woman who is the love interest, mother mostly, yes, especially in our cinema. In Scarface, sister is a very important part of the movie, and if you watch earlier Scarface, even it's there even in Al Pacino's Scarface, but the earlier version, Paul Muni's Scarface, the incest tone is so highlighted that he had strong feelings of attraction towards his sister. The sister becomes an integral feature in most of these films. There is always a mentor. Yes, there is. Okay, think of that. Okay, the glowing city streets during night time. Watch Public Enemies once more, and you will find now the cars, the clothes, the streets. Michael Mann is a master in creating these iconographies. I mean, LA is his space, LA is his city. Exactly. Watch Collateral. Thank you so much. Collateral, Heat. Heat is another heist gangster drama. The spaces are like the nightclubs, the streets, the bars, the restaurants, and the weaponry. Of course, say hello to my little friend, the Scarface. And invariably all this leading to invariably a very violent climax. It doesn't get more violent than Al Pacino's Scarface. What is the significance of the gangster genre? If you are looking at the overall history of cinema, it brought new vigor and new kind of vitality to the films. Stories became more and more realistic and hard hitting. Characters became more colorful and varied. So, we no longer had the same goody hero anymore. And very interestingly, language of the streets, you know what I mean, the jargon, the slang, these things found their way in the films. Otherwise, films were very careful about the kind of, it was almost like reading a play or watching a play, that kind of language. But then we had that kind of language finding its way in cinema. One of the earlier examples of this genre, Scarface, 1932, produced by Howard Hughes and directed by Howard Hawks, starring Paul Muni, scripted by Ben Hecht, along with W.R. Burnett and John Lee Mann. These are the names that you should know. If you are students of film studies, you should know film history. Okay, and based on a pulp novel. This is also why is Tarantino so interested in pulp? Why does he call his best movie Pulp Fiction? He is an avid consumer of pulp fiction, pulp novel, because from pulp we get so much of material. Okay, so many so much of detailing of American culture and history and society. Therefore, that is the importance of. So don't be dismissive of pulp. Pulp says a lot of things. It may be low art, low culture, yeah, but it gives you a slice of life. Scarface is rooted in contemporary reality, with people and incidents drawn directly from Chicago gangster history. The other day I was telling you about how Howard Hughes, he didn't want to release Scarface anymore, and it was released only after his death, okay, because he had to fight a long prolonged battle with the censors to release the movie. Okay. There is a dialogue in Scarface in 1932 version where he says, there is only one thing that gets orders and gives orders, and this is it, and indicates his machine gun. Okay. And if you watch Al Pacino's version of this, this is exactly the thing he says to his boss. You giving me order. Okay, watch the movie. Have you watched the movie of late? It's one of my all-time favorite films. He further says, that's how I got the south side for you, you know, the boroughs in this city, Chicago. And that's how I'm going to get the north side for you. It's a little typewriter, you know, machine gun. A gangster is also an author. Camera is still, that is, camera is a pen for a filmmaker. For a writer, it's typewriter. For the gangster, it's his machine gun. You know, punches holes in people. So it's a typewriter. I'm going to write my name all over the town with it. Now, Hays Court, which we have already done. So the release of Scarface, this is very interesting. A movie was almost delayed by a year because the producer Howard Hughes had to battle with the Hays office and regional censor boards. Okay, and the films could no longer show crimes. That's the idea. That's what the court prescribed. And the exact clause was that films cannot show crime in such a way as to throw sympathy with the crime as against law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire for imitation. That's what people say. You know, all the corruption in our society, blame it on the movies, right? There is a murder somewhere, people say. You see, this is the influence of the movies, which could be true to an extent. People watch a movie and they say, oh, you know, I learned this scene exactly from a movie. So, films shouldn't show such things which inspire sympathy for the wrongdoer, because it creates a very bad template for the society. So that's the idea, and therefore the producer had to fight a law. And how did they manage to release the movie? Do you know? It's like, you know, cigarettes. A cigarette pack is always accompanied. Today, if you watch a movie where the characters are smoking, what do you see? Scroll running throughout that cigarette smoking causes cancer, and then there is a list of ailments that you are given, not just cancer, but so many things are shown to you. The other day I was watching a movie directed by Sudhir Mishra, In Car, starring Arjun Rampal, where hero is a media executive, and he's a chain smoker. So for the first 5 or 10 minutes we were just treated to what happens to your lung and to your body if you smoke too much. I actually thought that I have inserted a wrong DVD. I mean, perhaps, you know, what I bought isn't what I really got. And then it comes, okay, so this is all a part of the film. So, because censorship has become so strong. Okay, so that's the way it is and we have to accept that. How did they get away with Scarface then? It also comes with a statutory warning. You watch that Scarface. Oliver Stone's Al Pacino, Brian De Palma version doesn't come with any statutory warning. Paul Muni version does come, and it tells you very, you know, in a very moralistic tone that crime does not pay.
They wouldn't allow it to be shown in cinema.
Yeah, but do you think that if today you watch a movie like Scarface,
Not today, no.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in the 80s also, I mean, you had all these Rambo movies releasing at the same time. Perhaps, you see, that's the difference. You know, Rambo, in spite of its excessive violence, is a politically correct film. Yeah. What does it tell you? America, Rambo is an out and out and all American good guy, and he's fighting the so-called others, defeating the Vietnamese, the Russians, the Afghans, all the bad people of the world. Okay, and Rambo goes on a killing gun. So I love the spoof. What was that, Hot Shot? Yes, with Charlie Sheen. Yeah, so it was a very intelligently, very cleverly done spoof of the film. But Scarface, very realistically done movie. All, of course, you know, it had the stardom of Al Pacino looming large over the movie. So, and Al Pacino is always over the top. He's operatic in his performance. Never the kind of actor who would give in to any underplaying or subtleties. Okay, he is always over the top, and that's part of his charm. Okay, so perhaps, you know, the role was enacted in such a way, the performance itself was so powerful. Okay, so, it just overtook the message that crime doesn't pay. I mean, who would bother with that if you could lead a life like Tony Montana? So therefore, perhaps X-ray, the so-called X-rating is important for that movie. A result of this prolonged fight between the producer and the censor board was that Hollywood producers, they panicked and embraced the code for self-defense. They said, we will regulate ourselves. The other day we were talking about Notorious and the famous kissing scene. You cannot have a kiss more than 2 or 3 seconds. But then how Hitchcock managed to. So there is always a way around, you know, to do certain things. Now, because the code became so strong and because the producers were so scared to make the kind of movies that they wanted to do, that they just shied away from making the gangster movies, because how do you make a gangster movie without glorifying the hero? You need to do that. You need to use certain kind of language. You need to use certain kind of excesses on screen, and they were not allowed to do that. So what did that lead to? I mean, audiences were ready for this kind of cinema. Okay, they still wanted this kind of cinema, the so-called anti-hero, the dangerous woman, not the goody two-shoes kinds of characters anymore. They wanted, so there was an audience, there was a demand. So all this led towards film noir. Okay. Now, noir hero is essentially a cop, a detective, a truth seeker. So you are using the same elements, a dangerous woman, a morally ambivalent hero, but he is no longer the lawbreaker. That's the idea. So therefore, noir could get away in spite of the very strict code, which the gangster hero couldn't get away with. So there was a lull in all these films about gangster heroes. There was the rise of film noir during the classic Hollywood times. There were certain high concept movies which didn't do well, and then we have already talked about new Hollywood cinema at length, And now, post Vietnam, there was another wave of gangster cinema. Now the code was no longer in existence. Bonnie and Clyde had redefined the rules of censorship, all the existing codes. So what happened? We had films like Bonnie and Clyde, 67, you know the list, the Saint Valentine's Day's Massacre, 1967, Bloody Mama, 1970, Boxcar Bertha, directed by Scorsese, good, 72, Capone, 75, and then of course the mother of all gangster films, The Godfather. And now it has become, the genre is here to stay. So we are talking about a very popular genre which has become a part of all collective consciousness, the gangster hero, and how a gangster movie satisfies most of the requirements of a genre film, a highly recognized, a highly popular kind of cinema, the gangster cinema. So from genre, a fixed category of genre, we will move on to genre blending, the category of genre blending, where the semantics and semiotics are confusing. They send us mixed signals. Okay, we were talking about the signifier and the signified, and we will see how these codes, which so firmly establish identities and categories in generic films, okay, the same codes are used to defy genres. In films, deliberately seek to defy or blend genres. There are certain fixed categories, genres, and we have seen how gangster satisfies the features of or expectations of a genre. There are certain films like Once Upon a Time in America, Sergio Leone's, which redefined the category, but still all the signifieds and the signifiers are in place. It's just the way plot, conflict and characters are developed in Leon's movie that we find that he is deviating from the genre, but it's still the genre is there. Okay, the purity of the genre remains. He experiments a lot with the way characters are sketched. That's the idea. But when you bend and blend genres, what happens? The semiotics are confusing. Viewers are kept guessing. So, you know, genres are very satisfactory categories. Audiences know what to expect. Here, audience don't know what to expect. Fargo, a pregnant cop, whoever had heard of such a thing. Comic villains, Steve Buscemi playing the kind of role he does so well. And when a filmmaker seeks to bend genre, he is subverting the established conventions and codes of an established genre. Typical examples, Terry Gilliam's Brazil, and it starts very vaguely, somewhere in the 20th century. It blends all the items of a science fiction, a romance, a futuristic kind of a film. It's a war movie, it's a dystopic movie, it's also a satire. My personal favorite is Mars Attacks by, it's a Tim Burton movie. Mars Attacks by Tim Burton. This is one of the rare movies in which we have no Johnny Depp. Okay, yeah, but it defies genre and how. Okay, it has Jack Nicholson, it has Pierce Brosnan, it has Sarah Jessica Parker, it has a host of big time actors, okay, and Glenn Close, but then you see what he does to them, and it's a spoof. Well, you can call it a spoof. At the same time, it's a throwback to all those so-called B movies, the cult movies of the 40s and the 50s. It's very pulpy. We know what Tim Burton is capable of doing. So it's something like, you know, clearing the path for someone like Tarantino. Because we have had people like Tim Burton, therefore we could have someone like Tarantino. But he came much later after these people, right? So, A Men Who Stare at Goats, starring George Clooney, a serious man. All these are standard examples. So, a supreme example of genre bending and genre blending in recent times would be Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, a much loved, much watched movie. Now, let's first talk about Tarantino and why is he so important to us. So, what are the subjects, what are the themes that inform Tarantino's films? He is informed by the works of pulp fiction writers. So, you see, the title itself comes, he pays a homage to his favorite writers, Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, James Caan, Raoul Whitfield, Horace McCoy. So, these are no highbrow literateurs, they are out and out massy entertainers, okay, and pulp writers. Crime writers, and this is important, Elmore Leonard, Charles Wilford. Other important influences, Hong Kong action films from the 80s and even the 70s. Okay, what can you mention? Give me examples from some of the movies.
Bruce Lee's films.
Bruce Willis, not Bruce Willis, Bruce Lee's films. Yeah, Hong Kong martial arts. Bruce Lee is the most well known, but there must have been several other lesser known people also. After all, Tarantino worked in a video library before making it big. So that's all he did for a living. He would watch movies. Okay, and since he would watch movies, and all kinds of movies. So even the title of the film Reservoir Dogs, it has a very interesting history. You know what?
It's
Someone came to borrow a video from his video library and asked for a French movie called Au revoir les enfants. It's a French movie, and the owner, who understood or spoke very little French, he said, I have no Reservoir Dogs. Okay, and Tarantino liked the exchange and it remained with him, and later on he used it as a title for his very first film. That's simple. So he gets his material and his inspiration from all over the place. Okay. Another major influence on Tarantino is blaxploitation cinema of the 70s. It's a subgenre. Blaxploitation is a subgenre of the B movies, so-called B movies, action flicks, basically centered on the black people, the black citizens, especially in the urban settings. The highest film genre, so cinema of Jean Melville, the French filmmaker who made a film like Bob the Flambeur. So that was a major influence, the highest cinema, and therefore you can see that in Reservoir Dogs. The girl gang movies and Death Proof is a very good example of the girl gang kind of films. Yes, the 60s Western, the spaghetti version of the Western movies. The B flicks, he is not looking at the John Wayne kind of Westerns, more the spaghetti and the B Westerns. Horror films, slasher films, that's another very popular. I mean, in Kill Bill, he goes all the way. You know, you have the heroine just taking off somebody's eye and chopping off an arm. So with so much of relish, and the blood just flows, it's free flowing all over the place, gushes out like a fountain. Vigilante movies of the 70s, think of Dirty Harry. Okay, so go ahead, make my day. Those smart one-liners, a tough street hero, vigilante films. And most of the television programs from the 60s to the 90s. The kind of cultural references, especially references from the popular culture he makes, is astounding. And people have written books on that. how much of television he must have watched and the kind of influences that he has gathered and imbibed, and all these things are reflected in his film. And does he have a genre? People have given his brand of cinema its title, and it's called Tarantino-esque. You know, there is he defies genre. Do you agree? Yeah. So if he makes a gangster film, you know what he is going to do. So salient features, what makes his cinema so special? His influences are enormous. So his film basically, and if there are features, then we can categorize them. So his kind of cinema basically hinges on a world of masculine codes of violence. He is immensely influenced by the masculine codes of violence as seen in the movies of someone like Sam Peckinpah, who made Straw Dogs, yeah, with Dustin Hoffman, which was recently remade.
Marsden.
I guess so, and it didn't do well at all. If you watch the Peckinpah version of Straw Dogs, it's so hard hitting. And also Peckinpah's Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia and The Wild Bunch. Another recurring theme is betrayal between friends in Tarantino. Men on a mission, let's go to work. That's the tagline of Reservoir Dogs. Man, let's get into character. That's the tagline of Pulp Fiction. His films deal with rituals and codes of criminals, yes. There are lengthy dialogues. It's almost like paying homage to the cinema of Godard, where people talk and lovers talk in close apartments, and some of the exchanges run into 20 minutes or so. And then in-depth discussions of pop culture. So what is pulp fiction? Originally pulp was a kind of material, you know, the printed kind of literature, lowbrow literature printed on cheap wood pulp paper, successor to something called penny dreadfuls and dime novels, which you can buy for a dime or a penny, not very expensive, cheaply available, accessible. So pulp afforded entertainment to working class people. Therefore, the word pulp, mostly an American phenomenon, featuring the hua pola and dealing with the lurid, sensational, titillating aspects of life. And some of the recurring themes in pulp was adultery, intrigue, and then you had street smart secretaries, mostly females, lots of murder and lots of sex. That is what you find in Tarantino's Pulp Fiction as well. So please do watch Pulp Fiction, and then we will be discussing how Pulp Fiction satisfies all the conditions of genre bending and blending. Thank you very much.